I like to read a story. Uh, it's something my grandfather wrote called My Radio Career. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me turn off this little that little flibbity flub, whatever that is. Radio was just getting started in our Nose Hill area of Alberta in the late 1920s. Our neighbor Zeb Witt had purchased a one-tube Westinghouse radio that worked on batteries and had earphones to listen with. It squeaked a lot, but it was the best for the time. Since Zeb had the only radio for many miles around, when some important news came along, he would connect the earphones to his telephone line. And after he had rung the 5 longs on the telephone for all to hear the latest news, this was of interest to me. So when Dad came home later with the 5-tube Atwater Kent radio that even had a loudspeaker, I've never heard of Atwater. I was greatly impressed, and as expected from an 8-year-old's perspective, and I added that word, but it's just the flow. Okay, back to it. I even learned the call letters for most of the stations that we could receive. My favorite programs were Amos and Andy, Gangbusters, and Ebb and Zeb, to name a few. After we moved to Maryland, my math teacher, Mr. Owens, found out that I was interested in radio and offered me some radio parts that he had in his garage. I was very pleased with this and promptly set away for a copy of Audell's radio book, which I studied up on. When World War II started, the Navy had a program called the Eddy Test. This test was to select recruits who were interested in radio. Naturally, I took the test and later was notified that I had passed and was awarded the rate of seaman first class upon signing up for the Navy. After graduating from high school, I entered the electrical engineering course at the University of Maryland and signed up for the draft with a student-deferred 1A rating. This meant that I was deferred from the draft as long as my grades were good, and I remained enrolled in class. During my sophomore year, my roommate was a radio ham and had convinced the dean of electrical engineering to allow him permission to set up a carrier current radio on campus for a thesis credit toward his master's degree. I was recruited to assist in the project while he recorded all the data and did the design work. The speech department had a studio with a glass partition that they had already used to teach classes in radio announcing. This was an ideal setup for us and would be a plus for the department when we got the station on the air. We had a control console with 2 turntables and volume controls on all the microphones and record players. The transmitter was situated in the basement's electrical vault of the building, and our transmitter was properly connected to the power lines. Soon we were on the air. My roommate went off to the service, and I was left in charge of the station. I kept it going for another year until one Sunday morning, a friend came running up to my room with the stunning words that the football team had broken into the studio and turned the station on. The worst part of it was that they must have been drunk because they were using obscene language. Yeah. I went down the steps 3 at a time and ran to the basement of the studio building and pulled the plug on the transmitter. When I got up 5 floors of the studio, the dean was already there. He was really giving all hands what for. I was told that the FCC was putting us off the air permanently. We were lucky that nothing more serious was assessed to us. On the May 22nd of 1944, I was sworn into the Navy as Seaman First Class and sent to Green Bay, Wisconsin for my boot training and further training in Chicago and Texas, and back to the Navy Pier Chicago out on Lake Michigan for my final training. At graduation, I received the rate of Electronic Technician's Mate, Second Class. While in Chicago on Liberty one night, I happened to be at a USO where Chicago station WGN was setting up for a remote broadcast. This attracted me to the technician to see just how a remote was set up for a regular station and see how close to proper I had done my own remotes. During my conversation with the technician, I had mentioned that I had operated a little station on campus, and he promptly took up his mic and introduced me on the air as the interrogator, the No Earth auditor. Okay, for as the interrogator for the finalist of the 4-H Eastern Division contest. My ad lib was sure put to the test right then. The winner, a young girl from North Carolina, was brought up to the desk where I was seated, and I think she was as much as a loss of words as I was. But we got through the interview with no great problem. This ended my career as a radio announcer. Later, I got a letter from the folks at home saying that a friend of ours in veteran Alberta heard me on the air and recognized me. Wow. My first ship assignment was to the USS Rocky Mount, AGC 3, a communication ship in the Pacific. And on board, we had 120 radio receivers and 80 transmitters for various frequency bands and power capabilities. This kept us busy keeping them all in order and connected to the proper stations on board ship. After I was discharged from the Navy, I married Marilla Settle, and soon therefore I started my own radio and television sales and service business in Norwalk, California. We managed this business for 13 years before selling it and moving to Maryland to take a position as electronic design engineer for Airpax Electronics. After retirement from Airpax, I became involved as a director for a radio museum, and as of now, I have the charge of several hundred antique and vintage radios, including several of those old Atwater Kents like Dad bought for us when I was a young boy. I miss you, Papa. Thank you. Thought I'd share that.